Hey, so we have a new episode of Legends and Leaders, and today it's great to have David here. David, you're somebody that's been kind of has an interesting background in the Wall Street space, but then shifted over to being really very entrepreneurial. And you've got a company that has very much disrupted the way that the typical filter system is done for families. I mean, you went like direct to consumer pretty early on, and now it's a much bigger trend today. And you entirely build it in the U.S. I mean, pretty much you're like one of the most fully U.S. Built and managed companies there is in this space, if not the most. And you've been really working to scale this out. Obviously your own content as well, and sharing a lot of learnings from your journey. So I'm excited to have you here and to get into your story.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So how did your passion for the world of business leadership, wanting to, to eventually build your own company in the filter space specifically, like how did this interest happen?
Well, I mean, it's one of these things that evolves over time, right? And I think that's one of the kind of misconceptions that a lot of people have about entrepreneurship. They think, oh, there's just this great aha moment and it was all, it was all smooth sailing from there. And that's just not how it works, in my opinion. I was interested in entrepreneurship and business from a young age. I grew up in a family business in Talladega, Alabama, and kind of got to see what that was like. And I was always fascinated by it. And what really kind of my earliest mentors were people like Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, who, I've read probably everything that either of them have ever publicly written, and, watched a lot of their old stuff, and, was always very impacted by that type of thinking. And, ultimately went off to work for Goldman Sachs, where I managed the options trading business. And that was a really kind of great experience for me, from kind of learning how the world works and learning how systems work. And so that I wouldn't trade that for the world, but I realized, pretty early on that it was not something that I wanted to do for the rest of my life. It wasn't consistent with kind of the business principles and whatnot that I just wanted to build and devote my life to. And so that ultimately led me to kind of searching for something new. And I had always been an entrepreneur, from a young age, on doing, internet type stuff, and, selling computers early on eBay that I was, kind of putting together, assembling myself back when that was a thing. And had, a number of businesses like that over the years that ultimately kind of gave me the skills that you need to be successful in a kind of, e-commerce world. And I saw the rise of the direct to consumer space, as you said. And to me, direct to consumer is very much about manufacturing your own product and selling it direct to consumer. And like most people that would look at what they call direct to consumer brands today, I think it's really a misnomer. It's like it's brands that manufacture with a contract manufacturer, generally overseas, that are putting their name and label on it, and maybe some innovation in their product, and then selling it using the e-commerce channel. And that is what direct to consumer became. But to me, it meant manufacturing a product and selling it direct to your end user. And now I wouldn't even consider us a direct to consumer company. I mean, we've expanded way beyond that, and I'm on a mission to build the world's leading indoor air quality company. But we sell in all different types of channels, and I think ultimately that is what any brand should aspire to. So that's the kind of very long story short.
Mm-hmm. So when you were on Wall Street, when you were at Goldman, how important do you think that that's been to your foundation today, to understanding how businesses work, operating a company? Do you think that was really fundamental and like overall?
Yes and no. I mean, I think that having experience in your 20s and kind of early on in your career is very important. And I think that if I had rushed into doing something entrepreneurial in the way that I have, that I would have struggled if I had rushed into it early on without any context or experience. I think my Goldman time really helped me to hone how I think about problems and think through problems. And by the nature of the business, I was always having to make decisions quickly, and oftentimes very impactful decisions. And so when you're doing that, you're not always making the right decisions. And so it kind of forces you to hone that muscle of making a decision, owning that decision, managing that risk, and not always being right. And so, that really, I think, has helped me in a major way, because I'm quick at making decisions. And then I try to keep my risks small, and iterate quickly. And I think, that type of mindset really helped me in my journey. But I think that there were lots of pathways you could go to finding that. But for me, it was definitely impactful and helpful. But I think that I would oftentimes encourage people to go out and just get experience, work with other entrepreneurs, work within other businesses, and let your curiosity ultimately be the guide that then, like, when you come up with an idea that you become obsessed with and you really believe in, that's when you kind of go out on your own and start to make your own mark, in my opinion.
And David, what was it like for you leaving that world? Because I mean, you probably were at a point where you had a good paying job. There was a lot of security there in that sense. Like, what was that experience like leaving?
Well, it was both scary and invigorating, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I purposely did it before I had children. I knew, like, I was 29 years old when I made the decision, and I was self-aware enough to know that I was not going to be happy doing what I was doing. 10 years from now, like, I knew I did not want to be living that same kind of life, and I knew that. I kind of had a window to make a decision, and I did that, and I went all in on it. Um, and, walking out, I was, of course, a little bit nervous because you go from having, I was making seven figures a year and a steady paycheck. And you know, I knew that I was going to, it was not really going to be possible to go back into that. At least it's a much, much harder road once you leave it to go, back in that type of world. But I'm a big believer in, you know, when you have a conviction on something, and you really want to do it, of going all in and kind of burning the boats and not giving yourself an out. And I think there's some freedom in that, because once you make that decision and you commit, then there really is no alternative. And, like, that's really how I felt about it from the beginning. And I think that if you're going to go out and do anything big, you have to have that belief in yourself, that belief in your vision, and that mindset. And that was kind of how I entered into this whole thing.
Mhm. So how did you land on the filter space? Like, why that space?
Yeah, it's a good question. Again, it was an evolution. It wasn't something that just happened overnight. The very long story short is, I basically started my finance career during right before the great financial crisis, and then when I moved to the trading desk, the great financial crisis started to happen, and I was became worried I was going to lose my job. And because I always had, an entrepreneur side hustle, I was like, well, like, how am I going to pay my bills if I lose my job? And I actually started, affiliate marketing, more or less, for StubHub at the time. And that was going really well. And I actually made more money in 2009 in that than I did in my day job. And I decided that, wouldn't it be nice if I owned the whole offer? And I started effectively drop shipping office supplies through a company that I called My Office Delivered. And we in 2009 sold like $5.5 million or $6.5 million worth of office supplies, primarily on Amazon. And if you look at the breakdown of that, about 40% of it was either ink cartridges or air filters. And we were drop shipping from a small company in Creole, Alabama, the air filters. And that's when I first was like, wow, this air filter market, it makes sense. Everybody needs them, but it's not something I ever thought about. I was living in an apartment in New York City that, didn't have central AC system. So it wasn't something that I, really used, but I really, like, the light bulb went off to me, like, hey, there's obviously a big market here. And, fast forward, I ended up having to shut down that business because, my career really took off. It actually ended up being good. The financial crisis was actually good for me from a career perspective. And I didn't have the bandwidth to do both. So I ended up shutting it down. And then in 2012, my family was going through the sale of a old school industrial supply business that was primarily servicing the wood product industry in the Southeast. My grandfather was still alive, didn't want to see it sold out of the family, and I basically bought that business out of obligation. It was a dying industrial supply business with the average salesperson in their 60s, that was feeding off of legacy relationships and whatnot. Bought the business, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do with this? I'm going to have to do something if I, want to survive. And I remembered my experience with the air filters and the ink cartridges. And so I studied both of those markets and ultimately decided to go all in on air filters, because I realized there were a lot of dynamics that made them, logistically challenging and whatnot. That like if I could, manufacture them competitively and minimize the touch points between me and the end user, that I would have a competitive advantage. And I've basically been building that idea ever since.
And how did you like make the filters?
How did I make them in the beginning?
Yeah.
Well, in the very beginning, I actually didn't think I was going to make them. I started buying them from another manufacturer, and about 2 months in, I realized that the only way that I was going to be able to do this was being able to make them. If we were always running out of stock of the wrong size, and it's like people were buying multiple sizes, and if you didn't have one, then you were in trouble because you were out of stock, and it. I realized that the only way to do the business at scale was going to be to control my own manufacturing. And so I, hired a guy as a consultant that was kind of retired, that was, had a small air filter company before. And he helped me to understand, the air filter manufacturing process. At the time we had no idea how big of a scale we were going to build it into, but I was just looking for a way to manufacture them. Bought a few very cheap pieces of equipment to start playing around with it, and started figuring it out. So I'd never really been in another air filter manufacturing business. We kind of figured it out, as we went, and we were incredibly inefficient in the beginning. If we were trying to sell, to commercial distributors, like we would have been hemorrhaging money because we were not very efficient at it. But because I was pretty dialed in on the marketing and that part of the game, I was able to kind of fund the inefficiencies in the beginning, by being good at the marketing and customer acquisition to get us to the point that we ultimately had scale that allowed us to really build out our kind of manufacturing process. So it took me 3 to 4 years to make the air filter manufacturing piece of it what I would call profitable, meaning that like where we could manufacture a filter cheaper than we could have bought it for. It took me a lot longer than I envisioned it would, but because we were kind of that hybrid business model, I was able to sustain that and sustain that learning phase.
That's interesting. So you had one kind of supporting the other, but also like David, you've been building in the U.S. It's something that's been really important to you. You guys manufacture 100% of products in the U.S. Is that something that you've done because it's more financially beneficial to be here? Is it something just because you personally care about building in the U.S.? Like, is that something that's better for your business overall?
Well, I mean, because I, bought a business in Talladega, Alabama that had like a lot of decaying kind of textile infrastructure, more or less. It was important to me to find something that I could manufacture in there competitively. Initially, it was just in Talladega. That was like a core thing that I was looking for when I decided on the air filter business, right? Or starting it. And, I picked air filters because I knew that I would have a competitive advantage manufacturing them in the U.S. because like the cost of shipping them is very high relative to the product cost. So, I realized that, by doing it the way that I was doing it, I would have a competitive advantage. I think if I had started with a product where, I was more expensive manufacturing in the U.S. and did not have that competitive advantage, I would fail, right? So I chose it because I knew I would have a competitive advantage with it. But then you fast forward to today. Like we're actually in the process of starting to manufacture air purifier filters and cabin air filters for cars. That's the first time we've really launched new products in quite a long time. And if you look at both of those product lines, they're mostly manufactured overseas currently. And we were already doing this kind of before the election, but now you look at it and tariffs are likely to start hitting a lot of these imported products. And we've built the infrastructure and like the kind of sales channel to be able to mass market in a way that in the beginning we wouldn't have been able to do. And we're able to take products that are traditionally manufactured overseas and I think make them competitively at a price point that's competitive here in the U.S. And I think that there are a lot of products that likely fit that bill if people would just be a little more creative and willing to put in the work to go and figure out how to actually manufacture them.
I agree. So the financial success of Filterbuy is pretty interesting. Where you've been able to get today from somebody who's kind of really new in the space in general. I mean, now you're more cemented, of course. But what was kind of some of these big breakthrough points, David, that you had that like took you to where you're at today from a revenue standpoint?
Yeah, again, like you're looking for a big breakthrough, and the reality is that it's steady, consistent compounding, right? I mean,
Mhm.
and I think that it's oftentimes not super grand at any one moment. In reality, is generally building the muscle and building the infrastructure that allows you to compound something over time. I mean, the couple of key insights I would give you there is that we purposefully chose, or I purposely chose, a consumable product because I recognize that, I wanted to be able to sell to a customer over and over and over again rather than having like a one time sale. I mean, there are plenty of people that run businesses that are great that just do one time sales, but I think that, for me, that's a much harder business to run. And, I'm more interested in things that are actually going to compound over time. So, we were able to compound our customer base over a long period of time to where now, like, 70% of our revenue is from people that have purchased from us before in any given month. And so that's really how build a business over a 10-year plus period, is just, compounding and having the right systems. But also, COVID was definitely a tailwind for us that, we leaned into and expanded heavily in. I think we're probably 2 to 3 years ahead of where we would have been if COVID had not happened. I mean, like, I think we inevitably we were compounding and building, and I'd already taken the business from 0 to 75 million or so a year through 2019. And then in COVID year, we effectively doubled or just about doubled. And then, that was obviously a kind of big bump that, we probably would not have gotten without COVID. But, it's the kind of thing that I think we were already on the road of compounding to where we are today. So, my advice would be that these things don't happen overnight. It's about repeating consistently your processes and building them and holding them in that allows you to compound something big over a long period of time.
It's definitely good advice. I think it's important people understand, the kind of time it really takes. And you've been smart to focus on bringing customers back, having these repeat customers. You don't have to go keep finding new ones and spending more money on that. You decided, David, to enter into the retail space with Walmart. Why was Walmart kind of the best partner for you? Is it just because of the scale they have? Is there some kind of way that the deal was structured with you guys that made it really great? Why were they the ideal partner?
Well, the honest answer is that they were the first ones that took a chance on us. So, I mean, we talked to a lot of retailers, or I actually spent quite a bit of time in the beginning. We're almost 2 years into that process, and we just have been selling in Walmart in the last 2 months. And Walmart really understood our vision for the category and the brand equity that we had built. And I think we're actually one of the more sophisticated, partners that we spoke with because it's such a big category for them. I mean, I believe that Walmart is the biggest seller of air filters in the U.S., at least to the residential market. So, they understood the category very, very well. And, we were able to have a very, high level discussion because they were so tuned in to everything. And it just, really seemed like it was a good fit and made a lot of sense for both of us. But, now we're rolled out to 505 Walmarts, and, we hope to expand within that. I think there are 4,200 or so in the U.S. And, we now have a retail team that is focused exclusively on that channel. That we are targeting partnering with another larger retailer in the next year and one other smaller retailer. The reality is that the volume is so high for those, and it's a very different business than our direct to consumer business. So, it's not the kind of thing where we could serve every retailer well overnight, right? It's something that you have to kind of gear up for and build up. And so, it's one of those things that 5 years from now, I suspect it'll be a monster channel for us. But, right now we're just getting started, and, I think most people don't start with Walmart as their first customer, and Walmart is, tricky to deal with operationally, but we've kind of gotten up that learning curve. And, feel very fortunate that, they were the first partner that we were able to work with.
I mean, it's a great partner to have as well because of the scale you can get with them. And so if you
Correct.
do well with them initially, I mean, the scale is just unprecedented. Um,
Correct.
David, how different has it been for you on the retail side versus the direct to consumer kind of online side? Like, what have been some of the things you that have stood out to you that are differences, and or is it just really very similar overall?
Oh, it's night and day difference. I think in air filters is particularly acute because um, the retail, you have very limited shelf space. So like, we manufacture 300 plus sizes. In retail, you're lucky to get, six sizes on a shelf kind of thing. So making sure that you have the right, selection in any given store. Making sure that you have the right packaging. I mean, the packaging is a very, very different animal for retail than it is for our direct to consumer business. Um, like requirements like RFID tags and the scannable UPCs and all of this kind of stuff, very different than the requirements for our direct to consumer business. And also making sure that you have the operations to actually package everything appropriately, wrap it all in the label everything correctly, make sure that pallets are labeled correctly, like all the little details that in our direct to consumer business we don't have to deal with. In retail, you do, and you have to get it right. Otherwise, there are huge penalties. And it's like how they measure you, like what is your accuracy rate, and are you fulfilling your orders on time, and like all of these metrics that we haven't had to deal with in our kind of traditional direct to consumer business that we figured out how to do. And then like they have different systems where you have to receive your purchase orders and bill back your POs and all this kind of stuff. It's definitely a different animal to learn. And like one of the things I think people don't kind of recognize is that when you're going into this, it's oftentimes the responsibility of the vendor, as in us, to make sure these things go well, to work with the distribution centers, to work with the trucking taking it in, all of that kind of stuff. Ultimately, if it doesn't go right, it's our problem, which means that we have to basically insert ourselves to understand operationally how their system works. And when you're starting from scratch, as we were, without any real experience with that, it's a big learning curve. That like I said, we're 18 months in, and it's still a tiny portion of our business, but that's just realistically what it takes to scale into something like that.
And David, what do you think the business is going to look like going forward between like the retail to direct to consumer and just in general? Like, what are you kind of most excited about to build at this point?
Well, I mean, the basically we have four pillars of our business, and we're actually going to on January 1st, I think, publish our exact revenue targets for 2025. But I mean, it's in the neighborhood of $280 million that we're targeting across four pillars. So it's our direct to consumer business, which is still by far our biggest, most established business. Then you have our business to business sales, which is kind of our second largest pillar, although probably our fastest growing, depending on how you look at it. Where we have a team of 26 outside salespeople throughout the U.S. that are calling on hospitals, hotels, and commercial buildings and whatnot. That's probably the biggest short term opportunity for us, because 70% of the market is kind of commercial and 30% is residential, and most of our historical business and direct to consumer business is residential. Then you have the retail channel, which we just spoke about, and then last but not least, our HVAC solutions business, where I'm on a mission to build the world's leading indoor air quality company. And a big piece of that is going to be building a large HVAC service business, a nationwide HVAC service business called Filterbuy HVAC Solutions, where we actually do, AC or furnace installations, repair, replacement, air duct cleaning, dryer vent cleaning, UV light installation, stuff like that, that is really important for indoor air quality. And that's our smallest pillar as it stands today, but the one that I think has the largest potential as we get to real scale.
Well, David, that was all the questions that I had. I appreciate you taking the time and doing this. I think you built something really impressive, especially this is kind of your first opportunity being a CEO and entrepreneur, and this is already what you've done. And it's a huge niche that a lot of people need help with. I mean, they need the right filters. We've had filters experiences where it's gone wrong, and I definitely have had the experience and understand what's necessary. And you built an amazing product in the space, so I'm excited to see what happens next, and wish you much success, David.
Well, thank you, Ben. I appreciate you having me.